Have you ever wondered what the most dangerous weapon in history actually is? Most people would probably say a sword, maybe a cannon. Some would jump straight to nuclear weapons because, let us be honest, it is difficult to beat, capable of ending civilization in a debate. But history has a different answer. The most dangerous weapon has always been forgetting. Because once a civilization forgets how something works, rebuilding it can take centuries. Just look at Rome. People love remembering its victories, its emperors, its gladiators. Its enormous arenas filled with cheering crowds that somehow always look cleaner in movies than they probably smelled in real life. But none of those things explain why Rome dominated so much of the known world for hundreds of years. The real secret wasn't hiding inside the Colosseum. It wasn't carried by the legions. It wasn't locked away inside the emperor's palace. It was hiding in thousands of ordinary people doing extraordinary jobs so well that nobody stopped to appreciate them. The engineer who designed a bridge, the surveyor who spent months measuring a valley, the craftsman shaping stone so precisely that two blocks fit together without mortar, the builder who trained an apprentice, who later trained another apprentice, who eventually taught someone else. Nobody remembers their names. Yet they quietly built one of the greatest civilizations humanity has ever seen. That's the strange thing about progress. When everything works, people stop noticing it. Nobody wakes up excited because the water still comes out of the tap. Nobody applauds because a bridge successfully survived another winter. Nobody throws a celebration simply because the roads are still where they were yesterday. Success becomes invisible until one day it isn't. Imagine waking up tomorrow to discover that electricity still exists, but nobody knows how power stations actually work. The lights slowly begin going out, engineers retire, replacement parts stop arriving. Computers fail one after another. The technology itself hasn't changed. The knowledge surrounding it has. That's far closer to Rome's story than most people realize. Empires don't usually collapse because one battle goes badly. They weaken because thousands of tiny connections slowly disappear. A road isn't repaired, a workshop closes, a teacher never finds another student. A bridge waits another year for maintenance. Each problem seems insignificant. Together, they change history. That's why Rome still fascinates us. Not because it was perfect, not because it was invincible, but because it reminds us of something surprisingly uncomfortable. Civilizations are not built by miracles, they rebuilt by habits. By routines, by ordinary people solving ordinary problems every single day. And once those habits disappear, even the greatest achievements begin to look like magic. Over the next few minutes, we're going to explore some of the remarkable ideas that allowed Rome to shape the ancient world, not because they were mythical or impossible, but because they were practical, repeatable, and supported by a society that understood the value of passing knowledge from one generation to the next. Because in the end, Rome's greatest invention wasn't a building or a machine. It was the simple belief that knowledge only matters if someone teaches it to the next person. And history has shown us, time and time again, just how expensive forgetting can become. One of the biggest mistakes people make when looking at ancient civilizations is assuming that the past was simple. We imagine a world of basic tools, simple houses, and people solving problems with nothing more than patience and muscle. And yes, there was plenty of muscle. Ancient people were very good at carrying heavy things. Extremely good. Actually, if lifting rocks were an Olympic sport, Rome probably would have won several medals. But that wasn't the reason Rome became powerful. Strength can build something once. Organization allows you to build it thousands of times. That difference changed everything. A single talented builder can create an impressive structure, but creating an entire network of roads, cities, water systems, and public buildings requires something much bigger. It requires a civilization where knowledge moves faster than mistakes. The Romans understood this better than most. They didn't just build objects, they built processes. A Roman engineer wasn't simply someone who knew how to construct a bridge. He was part of a tradition. He learned from others, followed tested methods, improved old ideas, and passed his knowledge forward. The empire became a machine where every generation added another piece. And when a machine like that works for hundreds of years, people begin to assume it will last forever. That might be the biggest illusion in human history. Nothing lasts forever just because it lasted a long time. The Romans discovered this in the most unexpected way. Their greatest achievements depended on something much more fragile than stone. They depended on people. A road made of stone seems permanent, but the knowledge required to repair it isn't. A massive building looks unstoppable, but the skills needed to maintain it can disappear in a single generation. A city can survive an earthquake, A society can struggle to survive the loss of its experts. This is why some of Rome's greatest achievements are so fascinating. They weren't lost because they were useless. They weren't abandoned because someone invented something better. Many disappeared simply because the world that supported them changed. And when the support system vanished, even brilliant ideas began to fade. Take something as ordinary as construction. Today, we walk through cities filled with concrete, glass, steel, and machines without thinking twice. We see buildings reaching into the clouds and assume that modern technology has always moved forward in a straight line. But history is not a straight road. Sometimes it is a road with missing sections, confusing turns, and a few places where humanity apparently decided to leave the instruction manual behind. The Romans were masters of materials. They understood how different stones behaved. They knew how to create structures that could survive enormous pressure. They experimented with combinations of materials to solve problems that many civilizations after them would struggle with. Their buildings weren't just large, they were calculated. Every arch, every column, every foundation, everything had a purpose. The Romans were not simply trying to impress future generations. They were trying to solve practical problems. How do you move water across huge distances? How do you create cities that can support hundreds of thousands of people? How do you build roads that allow communication across an enormous territory? These questions sound modern, but the Romans were asking them thousands of years ago. And perhaps the most impressive part is that they didn't solve these problems once. They created methods that could be repeated again and again. That is the difference between a clever idea and a civilization-changing idea. A clever person can invent something amazing. A great civilization figures out how to make that invention useful for millions of people. Rome understood that, and that understanding created something far more powerful than any individual invention. It created momentum. For centuries, Roman society kept improving because every generation inherited a foundation built by the previous one. A young engineer didn't have to start from nothing. A new builder didn't have to rediscover everything. They were standing on the shoulders of thousands of people who came before them. And that is how human progress is supposed to work, except there is one problem. Someone has to keep carrying the knowledge forward. Because the moment the chain breaks, everything changes, and Rome's story is not only about what it built. It is also about what happened when fewer and fewer people knew how to keep those achievements alive. The most fascinating thing about lost knowledge is that it usually doesn't look lost at first. There is no dramatic moment where everyone suddenly realizes, congratulations, humanity has forgotten how to do something important. Nobody rings a giant bell, nobody sends out a warning message. The decline happens quietly. A workshop that once produced hundreds of skilled craftsmen now produces a few. A technique that was once common becomes something only specialists understand. A process that every apprentice used to learn becomes something nobody bothers teaching anymore. And eventually, people stop realizing that anything has been lost at all. They simply accept the new reality. That's one of the strangest parts of history. Future generations often inherit the results of past achievements without inheriting the knowledge that created them. They see the masterpiece, they don't see the thousands of hours behind it. Imagine finding a modern airplane in a world without aviation. You could study the wings, you could examine the engines. You could sit inside the cockpit, you would know that humans once flew. But understanding how to build another one would be a completely different challenge. The physical object is only the final chapter. The real story is everything that came before. The mathematics, the experiments, the failed attempts, the people who spent their lives solving tiny problems that nobody else even noticed. Rome was full of those invisible achievements. A functioning city requires thousands of things to go right. Food must arrive, water must flow, buildings must remain safe, messages must travel, supplies must move. People often focus on the spectacular parts of Rome because those are easier to imagine. The battles, the emperors, the monuments. But behind every famous Roman achievement was a mountain of ordinary work. Someone had to calculate measurements, someone had to transport materials, someone had to maintain equipment, someone had to teach the next person how to continue. Civilization is not a statue, it is a living process, and processes need care. This is why infrastructure might be one of the most underrated inventions in human history. A road is not just a road, it is an agreement between generations. The people who build it trust that future people will maintain it. The people who use it today trust that someone repaired the damage caused by yesterday's storms. Every bridge, every water system, every city street represents a promise that someone will continue the work. The Romans understood this better than almost anyone. Their empire was connected by thousands of miles of roads. Those roads carried soldiers, merchants, officials, and ideas. They allowed information to move. They allowed resources to move. They allowed Rome itself to function, but a road without maintenance is just a memory. Stone does not care about empires. Rain does not respect borders. Nature is incredibly patient. It can wait decades while humans argue about budgets and priorities. Then, slowly, it begins taking everything back. A crack becomes a gap. A gap becomes a collapse. A maintained structure becomes an abandoned ruin. And the sad part is that the people watching it happen often don't realize what they are losing. They don't see the disappearance of a complex system. They only see a broken object. That asks how knowledge fades, not because people become incapable. Not because humanity suddenly becomes less intelligent. Because circumstances change. A society focused on survival has less time to preserve complicated skills. When resources become limited, people naturally focus on immediate needs. Food, safety, shelter, stability. A revolutionary invention becomes less important when everyone is simply trying to get through the next winter. And that may be the most human part of Rome's story. The people who came after Rome were not foolish, they were not unable to think. They were living in a different world with different problems. The question was not whether they were smart enough to rebuild Rome. The question was whether they had the same conditions that allowed Rome to exist in the first place. Because genius alone does not create civilizations, resources do. Cooperation does, time does, and perhaps most importantly, memory does. And that, in its own clumsy way, is the real lesson of Rome. Not that forgetting is inevitable, but that remembering is optional. You can choose to keep the chain alive. You can choose to write the extra paragraphs. You can choose to teach the next generation, even when you're tired, even when you're busy, even when you'd rather just hit publish and call it a day. But if you don't worry, someone else will, or they want to. And then, a few hundred years later, some guy with a YouTube channel will make a video about it, only to realize he didn't write enough material. And then he'll start talking about how important memory is while proving the exact opposite. That's the circle of life, I suppose. The wheel turns, empires rise and fall. Scripts run long and short, and somewhere in the great cosmic archive of human achievement, there's a footnote that reads, they knew what was coming. They just didn't get around to finishing the ending. But you, my friend, are still here. You're still listening, which means you haven't forgotten the point, even if I momentarily did. And that's what matters, because memory isn't a solo sport. It's a relay race. You catch the baton, you run with it, and when you trip, because you will trip, you hand it off to someone who is still standing. Consider this rambling, self-indulgent, slightly desperate conclusion my clumsy handoff to you. Take what you've heard today about roads, about water, about the invisible people who kept Rome breathing, and pass it along. Tell someone, write it down, make a video, make a better video than this one, with a proper runtime and a punchline that actually lands. As for me, I'll be over here, counting my words and questioning my life choices. But I'll remember this moment. And I'll probably laugh about it later, right after I finish updating my word processor with a feature that screams at me when I am about to run out of text. So, thank you for sticking with me through the abbreviated empire of my attention span. Thank you for not clicking away when the script started to wobble. And most of all, thank you for reminding me that even a failed ending can still teach something, if nothing else, that next time, I really should write the damn thing in full before I press record. Until then, keep the aqueducts flowing, keep the roads maintained, and for goodness sake, keep a backup paragraph in your pocket. You never know when you'll need it. Catch you on the other side of the edit button. And perhaps most importantly, memory does, and that, my friends, is where we run straight into the most beautifully humiliating irony of this entire production. I have spent the last 11 minutes painting a vivid, slightly dramatic picture of how civilizations crumble when knowledge slips through the cracks. I have warned you about aqueducts, about roads, about the quiet disappearance of skilled craftsmen. I have made forgetting sound like the ultimate villain of human history, silent, patient, and devastatingly effective. And then, in a stroke of cosmic comedy, I forgot to write a long enough script. If that doesn't prove my own point, I honestly don't know what does. Here I am, standing on the crumbling ruins of my own outline, watching my runtime collapse like a poorly maintained Roman bridge during a minor flood. The barbarians aren't at the gates, they ray inside my word processor, laughing at my character count. But let us not panic, let us treat this not as a failure, but as a demonstration. A live experiment, if you will, because if forgetting is truly the most dangerous weapon in history, then what we're witnessing right now is a textbook case of self-inflicted friendly fire. I have become the very thing I swore to defeat, a person who assumed the ending would just take care of itself. And yet, isn't that exactly how every great collapse begins? Not with a bang, not with an invasion, but with a quiet, nagging suspicion that you probably should have prepared.